The small-town courthouse had the quiet, formal air that accompanied places of law and order. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, reflecting off polished wooden benches and casting warm lines across the marble floor. The morning was bustling with a low hum of activity clerks shuffling papers, lawyers adjusting their ties, and the occasional murmur of someone arriving late. In the middle of this routine chaos, a minor case involving a neighborhood dispute was about to unfold. The topic seemed trivial, a property disagreement between neighbors, yet the stakes for the adults involved felt very real. Tension hovered in the air, palpable to everyone present. Amidst the crowd sat Emily, a 3-year-old girl, perched on the edge of a wooden bench, her tiny hands gripping the folds of her mother's skirt. Her dark curls bounced slightly as she leaned forward, peering at the strangers and the imposing space. Emily's mother, a gentle woman named Claire, was careful to keep her daughter close, whispering quiet reminders to stay seated. But Emily's attention was not on the lawyers or the judge, nor on the arguments about fences or property lines. Her gaze had found another figure entirely, a large, calm police dog named Rex, sitting patiently beside his handler. Rex was no ordinary dog. His coat was a glossy black, eyes alert but gentle, and his posture radiated discipline. He was trained to assist the police in a multitude of ways detecting substances, assisting in arrests, and providing safety to those around him. Today, however, he seemed more like a companion than a law enforcer. Emily's eyes widened at the sight of him. She had never seen a police dog up close before, only in storybooks or on television, but nothing compared to seeing one in real life. The courtroom, normally a place of stern authority and formality, was alive with an almost imperceptible tension as officers presented the details of the case. Adults spoke in measured tones, citing laws and precedents with precision. Lawyers scribbled notes, occasionally looking up to gauge the reactions of the judge or the other party. The judge himself, a man in his late 50s with kind but serious eyes, presided over the proceedings with measured calm. His gavel rested nearby, ready to call for order if needed. Yet Emily's focus remained entirely on Rex. She watched his ears twitch in response to distant sounds, his tail wagging ever so slightly. Something about his calm demeanor called to her. While the adults debated legal points, Emily's world had narrowed down to a simple truth. Rex was fascinating, and she wanted to interact with him. She shifted on the bench, whispering softly to herself, as though trying out words she might one day speak to the dog. Her mother noticed the attention, but allowed it, sensing that Emily's fascination was harmless. "Just be careful," Claire murmured, holding Emily's hand a little tighter. "He's a big dog, sweetheart." Emily nodded seriously, as if she understood the warning perfectly, though in truth, her mind was already filled with wonder. She imagined what it would be like to pet Rex, to speak to him, and perhaps even make him her friend. In that moment, Emily's innocence contrasted sharply with the adult seriousness around her, highlighting a purity that was untouched by tension or fear. Rex, sensing Emily's gaze, shifted slightly in his seat. He sniffed the air, and then lifted his head, meeting her eyes with a calm curiosity. Emily's lips parted in a soft, excited gasp. She leaned forward, careful not to startle him, her tiny hands reaching toward his shiny coat. The dog, trained to respond to human emotions, sensed the gentleness in her approach. He wagged his tail just a little, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge her presence. The courtroom, engrossed in the proceedings, barely noticed the quiet interaction unfolding at the front. The adults continued to argue, unaware of the small moment of connection between child and dog. Officers described the case, citing evidence and explaining their investigative work. Lawyers countered, presenting charts, statements, and photographs. Every voice in the room was serious, measured, precise. Yet amid the monotony of legal exchanges, Emily's wonder shone as a beacon of innocence. Her focus on Rex was absolute. Nothing else in the courtroom mattered. The contrast was almost poetic. Here were adults entangled in rules and procedures, and there was a child, seeing the world simply, with curiosity and trust. As the morning wore on, Emily's attention did not waver. She whispered tiny, inaudible words to Rex, testing the waters, watching as he remained calm, steady, and attentive. The dog's presence had a strangely soothing effect on the courtroom. Some of the officers began to notice Emily, smiling quietly at the sight of a tiny child, so unafraid of a creature they often portrayed as intimidating. Even the judge, glancing up from his notes, caught a glimpse of Emily's earnest expression and Rex's gentle composure. A rare warmth seeped into the proceedings, a softness in a space usually reserved for strict decorum. The story of this morning, though centered on a minor dispute, was quietly transforming. Emily, through her curiosity and innocence, was about to become the center of attention in a way no one anticipated. Her fascination with Rex was natural, unfiltered, and completely genuine, a child's response to something new and magnificent. The dog, in turn, responded with quiet patience, his training allowing him to sense Emily's gentle intentions. It was as though they were speaking in a language only they understood, a silent connection, bridging human and animal, adult formality and childlike wonder. By the time the first witness took the stand, Emily had fully approached Rex, standing on tiptoe, eyes wide with excitement. Her mother followed closely, ready to intervene if necessary, but it was clear nothing could interrupt this budding friendship. The courtroom, still engrossed in the adult-focused legal proceedings, had yet to witness the moment that would eventually stun everyone present. For now, it was just a child and a dog, their silent conversation unfolding against the backdrop of a bustling courthouse, unaware of the lasting impact their interaction would soon have. And so, the stage was set. What began as a routine morning in a small-town courthouse, a minor case, adults in formal attire, discussions about law, was slowly transforming into a story of innocence, curiosity, and unexpected connection. Emily, with her wide eyes and gentle voice, and Rex, with his calm intelligence, were poised to remind everyone in that courtroom that even amidst seriousness and tension, there was room for wonder, kindness, and a simple gesture that could melt the hardest hearts. Emily's fascination with Rex grew with each passing moment. The courtroom, once a place of sterile rules and hushed murmurs, now seemed less intimidating to her. Sunlight reflected off Rex's glossy coat, highlighting the sharp contrast between the serious, adult world around them and the pure, innocent curiosity of a 3-year-old. Emily could barely contain her excitement, her small fingers twitching as she imagined reaching out to touch him. Her mother, Claire, gently guided her hand, whispering cautions, yet allowed Emily the freedom to explore this newfound curiosity. Rex, sitting tall and alert beside his handler, noticed the child's gaze. Trained for countless hours to observe and respond to human emotion, he recognized her approach as entirely gentle. His ears twitched slightly, and his tail lifted in a subtle wag, as if silently greeting the child. Emily, noticing the tail movement, clapped her hands softly, whispering words too quiet for anyone else to hear. To her, this was more than just a dog. It was a friend, a companion in a strange and serious place. The courtroom buzzed with the voices of lawyers, witnesses, and spectators. Yet for Emily and Rex, the noise seemed distant. She took a small, careful step forward, holding on to her mother's skirt with one hand while extending the other toward Rex. The dog leaned in slightly, sniffing her tiny fingers with calm curiosity. Emily giggled softly, a sound like a tiny bell ringing in the heavy atmosphere of the courtroom. The adults began to notice, exchanging quiet glances, some smiling, others merely intrigued. The presence of a child interacting so naturally with a police dog in such a formal setting was unusual. The judge, a man named Harold Benson, adjusted his glasses as he observed the scene. Normally focused on legal arguments and procedural correctness, he now found himself distracted by the unusual tableau. A 3-year-old girl and a trained police dog, communicating in ways words could not capture. He leaned back in his chair, momentarily considering how such a small interaction could affect the mood in a room so dominated by rules and authority. For a moment, he allowed himself to smile, silently acknowledging the rare, unexpected joy that had entered his courtroom. Emily whispered to Rex, tilting her head as if sharing a secret. The dog, trained to detect subtle emotional cues, responded with a gentle nuzzle against her hand. The interaction was silent, yet profoundly moving. Officers watching from the sides of the courtroom were visibly touched. Officer Martinez, Rex's handler, knelt slightly to ensure Emily's safety, amazed at the child's fearlessness and the dog's patience. Even the sternest lawyer, reviewing her notes, found her attention pulled toward the warmth emanating from the tiny human and the canine. Emily's mother, Claire, could not help but smile at the sight. She had seen her daughter interact with animals before, but never in such a formal and intimidating setting. Emily's innocence was infectious. She spoke softly to Rex, as if explaining the courtroom to him in her own words. "Don't be scared," she murmured, her voice filled with pure sincerity. Rex tilted his head in response, his dark eyes meeting hers with calm understanding. To the adults, this was simply a child playing with a dog. To Emily, it was a conversation, a connection that transcended age, size, and circumstance. As the first witness approached the stand, Emily remained engrossed in Rex. She leaned forward slightly, her small body tense with curiosity. Rex responded by sitting perfectly still, his tail wagging ever so slightly. The courtroom, absorbed in the unfolding case, had begun to notice the subtle energy shift. A few spectators whispered softly among themselves, smiling at the unusual display. The judge, observing quietly, allowed the case to proceed, but could not completely suppress his fascination. He sensed that Emily's interaction with Rex was creating a mood he had not felt in a courtroom in years. A lightness, a subtle warmth amidst the usual formality. Emily's laughter, quiet yet contagious, broke through the monotony of legal proceedings. The sound was soft, like a gentle breeze, and it drew the attention of everyone in the room. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, witnesses hesitated, and even the court reporter's fingers faltered on the typewriter keys. The judge cleared his throat, a subtle acknowledgement of the rare moment. Yet he could not admonish the child. Emily's presence had shifted the emotional weight of the room. What had been a tense, rigid atmosphere now held an unexpected softness, a reminder that even in serious settings, innocence had the power to captivate and calm. Emily slowly approached Rex, her small hand outstretched, trembling with excitement. She reached out to touch his head, her fingers brushing against his fur. Rex leaned in slightly, accepting the gentle contact. Emily's eyes sparkled with wonder as she whispered something too soft for others to hear. The dog, sensing her genuine affection, pressed his snout gently against her hand. The scene was so unusual that the courtroom seemed to pause, as if collectively holding its breath. Adults began to exchange glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling warmly at the purity of the moment. Officer Martinez, keeping a careful eye on both child and dog, realized that something extraordinary was unfolding. Emily's bravery and curiosity were evident in the way she approached Rex without hesitation. The dog's calm, attentive demeanor provided the perfect counterbalance to her energy. Claire, Emily's mother, felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. She understood that her daughter's actions were innocent, yet the courtroom was no place for unpredictability. Still, she could not suppress a smile, recognizing that Emily's engagement with Rex had brought an unspoken harmony to the room. The judge, Harold Benson, watched quietly from his bench. He had presided over countless cases, witnessed disputes, arguments, and emotional testimonies. Yet something about Emily's interaction with Rex struck him deeply. There was a simplicity, an authenticity, in a child's perspective that adults often overlooked. As he observed her small hands touching the dog, her whispered words, and Rex's patient response, he felt a rare sense of wonder. This was not part of any legal procedure, nor did it fit within the rules of the courtroom. Yet it was profoundly human, and it commanded attention in a way no argument or evidence could. As the morning session continued, Emily remained close to Rex. Her curiosity was unyielding, and the dog's calm patience encouraged her exploration. The adults, gradually acclimating to this unusual distraction, began to appreciate the subtle magic unfolding before them. Witnesses delivered their statements. Lawyers presented their points. Yet the warmth Emily and Rex exuded lingered in the room. Even the judge felt it a quiet reminder that, amid seriousness and procedural rigidity, moments of genuine human connection could not be ignored. Emily's innocence had quietly, yet powerfully, reshaped the courtroom environment. By the end of the morning, Emily's presence and her interaction with Rex had left an indelible mark. What began as a routine, uneventful session of minor legal proceedings had transformed into a scene of unexpected joy and innocence. The courtroom, now infused with a sense of warmth and humanity, prepared for the next phase of the case. Emily, unaware of the impact she had made, remained focused on Rex, her new friend in a world that often seemed too serious for a 3-year-old to navigate. And so, the first impressions were made. Emily and Rex had connected in a way that transcended age, size, and societal expectations. The adults in the courtroom, though initially distracted by legal formalities, could not help but feel the subtle shift, a reminder that even in places dominated by rules, logic, and procedure, innocence and compassion held power. This was only the beginning. Little did anyone know that Emily's simple curiosity and her interaction with Rex would soon culminate in a moment that stunned the entire courtroom, changing the day and perhaps the lives of all present forever. By late morning, the courthouse had settled into a rhythm. The minor case at hand, a dispute over a neighbor's fence and encroaching property lines, was about to enter its formal proceedings. The judge, Harold Benson, called the courtroom to order with a firm but calm voice. "All rise," he commanded. Lawyers straightened, clerks shuffled papers, and spectators reluctantly moved to their seats. Emily, perched on her mother's lap, glanced around nervously for a moment, but her attention quickly returned to Rex, who now sat attentively beside his handler, his dark eyes alert yet calm. The attorneys began presenting their cases. One lawyer, a woman named Samantha Fields, spoke with precision, referencing local ordinances, property maps, and testimonies from neighbors. Her voice carried authority and confidence, detailing the minor transgression that had caused months of tension. On the opposing side, Thomas Green, a slightly older lawyer with a stern demeanor, countered with equal fervor, questioning the evidence and highlighting discrepancies in witness statements. The adults in the courtroom were deeply engaged, their focus entirely on the legal arguments. But Emily, perched on the edge of the bench, had no interest in maps or testimony. She only cared about Rex. Emily leaned forward, whispering softly to the dog, as if explaining the proceedings to him in her own words. "Don't worry, he's just talking," she murmured, her tiny fingers brushing the dog's paw gently. Rex, trained to recognize emotional cues, remained perfectly still, his gaze following Emily's every move. To the untrained eye, it looked like a child and a dog sharing a quiet moment amidst chaos. Yet there was something deeper, a silent understanding that transcended language. Emily's mother, Claire, watched nervously but allowed the interaction, recognizing that forcing her daughter to ignore the dog would be futile. The courtroom staff began noticing the unusual bond. Officers exchanged subtle glances, unsure whether to intervene. Some smiled discreetly, while others watched with mild curiosity. Even the judge's stern expression softened as he glanced down at Emily and Rex. Here was a child, entirely absorbed in the presence of a police dog, and a dog perfectly attuned to the child's innocence. In a room filled with tension, arguments, and the weight of legal formalities, this connection was almost magical, a silent reminder that not everything in life could be dissected with logic or evidence. Witnesses were called one by one. Each approached the stand with rehearsed statements and carefully chosen words. Lawyers questioned them methodically, drawing out inconsistencies or confirmations. Emily, however, remained undeterred by the proceedings. Her eyes never left Rex. She whispered tiny words of encouragement, pointing to his shiny coat and giggling softly whenever he responded with a gentle nuzzle. The courtroom had begun to recognize her presence as more than a distraction. It was a subtle lightness in an otherwise rigid environment. People began to notice how Emily's innocent engagement with Rex was affecting the mood. Officer Martinez, observing closely, realized that the dog's presence and Emily's curiosity were having a calming effect on the room. Even witnesses who were nervous or agitated seemed less tense when Rex and the child were near. Lawyers, initially frustrated by the slight distraction, eventually adapted, recognizing that Emily's innocence was creating an atmosphere conducive to clearer, calmer testimonies. The judge, too, noted the subtle change. His eyes softened as he listened to the arguments, realizing that sometimes the presence of innocence could remind adults of the humanity behind every case, every dispute, and every person in the room. Emily's whispers grew bolder. "Good boy, Rex," she murmured, her words barely audible to the adults, but crystal clear in meaning. The dog leaned slightly toward her, sensing her sincerity. Emily's tiny hand reached out to touch his head again, and the gesture was reciprocated with gentle nudges. Observers could not ignore it. Here was a moment of pure connection, an unspoken communication that reminded everyone in the room of simpler truth, trust, loyalty, and compassion. The judge's fingers tapped lightly on the desk, as if acknowledging the presence of this quiet lesson amidst the legal proceedings. As the case moved forward, Emily's role became increasingly central in an unexpected way. Her curiosity about Rex was infectious. Some of the adults, initially focused solely on legal arguments, found themselves glancing toward the child, smiling without realizing it. The courtroom's atmosphere, once tense and mechanical, began to breathe. Emily had reminded everyone that the stakes of life were not always measured in property disputes, fines, or legal victories. Sometimes the most significant impact came from small gestures, quiet courage, and simple, heartfelt words. The judge, Harold Benson, observed this transformation silently. Years on the bench had taught him to expect decorum, to prioritize logic, and to maintain order at all costs. Yet, Emily's innocence and Rex's calm presence challenged his notions of authority. He realized that human connection, even in the most formal settings, could shift perceptions, influence moods, and bring clarity where tension once ruled. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to reflect on the power of empathy and simplicity, as he watched the tiny girl whispering to a massive police dog in a room filled with adults arguing over trivial matters. The lawyers continued presenting evidence, but the room's energy had subtly changed. Witnesses spoke more openly, some even smiling as they recalled minor events, their testimonies becoming less tense and more genuine. Emily remained close to Rex, occasionally patting his head or speaking softly. The dog's calm presence reinforced the sense of safety and trust, creating a rare environment where adults, too, felt unguarded. Claire, observing her daughter, felt a swell of pride and awe. Emily had managed to captivate the entire room without any awareness of her power. Emily's whispered words to Rex were growing in confidence, though still inaudible to anyone but the dog. "It's okay, you're brave," she murmured, kneeling slightly to match his height. The dog responded with a gentle nudge, an unspoken acknowledgement of her sincerity. Adults could only watch in amazement as this small interaction continued amidst formal testimony and legal arguments. The judge leaned back, reflecting on the significance of what he was witnessing. A child's innocence, paired with a loyal dog's intuition, creating an atmosphere that softened the hardest hearts and reminded everyone present of humanity's enduring truths. By midday, it was clear that Emily and Rex had shifted the focus of the courtroom in an unexpected way. The minor legal case, which could have been mundane and forgettable, had been transformed into an event that no one would forget. Emily, oblivious to the broader significance, continued to whisper, touch, and giggle at her canine friend. The courtroom, once dominated by argument, procedure, and tension, now resonated with quiet joy, wonder, and a sense of shared humanity. The stage was set for a moment that would soon stun the entire courtroom and leave an indelible mark on everyone present. And so, the court proceedings officially began, but the real story was not about property lines or legal disputes. It was about a 3-year-old girl who, through simple curiosity and fearless innocence, had begun to transform the mood of a serious courtroom. It was about a police dog whose patience and intuition allowed him to connect with her effortlessly. And it was about the quiet power of empathy and presence, proving that sometimes the smallest participants, those with the purest hearts, could make the greatest impact. The morning had progressed, and the courtroom's atmosphere was now subtly transformed. What had begun as a mundane session for a minor neighborhood dispute had slowly shifted into something far more extraordinary. Emily, perched on her mother's lap, had become a quiet centerpiece, drawing eyes and hearts alike. While the adults debated property lines, legal responsibilities, and witness testimony, Emily's attention never wavered from Rex, the large, calm police dog whose mere presence had already begun to soften the room's rigidity. Claire, Emily's mother, had grown accustomed to her daughter's fascination, but remained watchful. She noticed Emily leaning slightly forward, whispering in a tone too soft for anyone else to hear. "He's listening," Emily murmured to her mother, her dark eyes wide with excitement. Claire could only nod, unsure whether to intervene or let the child explore this rare moment of connection. She understood that Emily was brave in a way most adults would hesitate to be in such a formal, intimidating setting. Emily's curiosity had grown bolder with every passing minute. She carefully adjusted her small hands, brushing stray curls from her face, and whispered to Rex again. This time, her words were tinged with an audacity that only a child could muster. She wanted to bridge the distance between them fully, to engage with the dog, not just in fascination, but in conversation. Rex, trained to perceive intent and emotion, responded with a gentle tilt of the head and a small, patient wag of the tail. The officers, sitting nearby, were increasingly aware of the unusual dynamic unfolding. Officer Martinez, Rex's handler, observed Emily closely. He knew Rex's training allowed him to interact safely with the public, but he was still surprised at how completely the dog had accepted the child. Emily's innocence and courage had clearly registered in Rex's perception. "She's got his attention," Martinez whispered to a colleague. The colleague nodded, equally impressed. What made this so extraordinary wasn't just the calm demeanor of Rex, but the genuine connection forming between a tiny human and a trained police dog amidst the seriousness of a courtroom. Emily's small voice carried snippets of conversation meant only for Rex. "Don't be nervous," she said softly. "You're doing great." The dog leaned slightly closer, sniffing her tiny fingers with gentle interest. Emily giggled in delight, reaching out to touch his shiny black coat. The texture fascinated her, soft yet firm, a tactile contrast to the hardwood benches and polished floors surrounding them. For Emily, the dog was no longer just a creature. He was a confidant, a companion in a world dominated by stern faces and formal voices. The courtroom, initially oblivious, gradually became aware of Emily's growing boldness. Lawyers paused mid-argument, witnesses hesitated in their statements, and even the judge's attention flickered toward the child. Harold Benson, the presiding judge, adjusted his glasses and leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. He had seen many unusual moments in his decades on the bench, but this was different. A child 3 years old, innocent and fearless, was interacting with a police dog in a formal courtroom, and it was captivating everyone present. For a fleeting moment, the adult world of authority and decorum had softened under the weight of childlike wonder. Emily's curiosity was insatiable. She wanted to know more about Rex, to understand him, and to communicate in the only language she knew: honesty and affection. "Are you hungry?" she whispered, kneeling slightly to match the dog's height. Rex responded by gently nudging her hand with his nose, a silent acknowledgement. Emily laughed, a bright, infectious sound that rang through the quiet corners of the courtroom. Spectators who had been bored, frustrated, or indifferent now found themselves smiling, their attention drawn to the small human and her canine companion. Even the lawyers, initially annoyed by what they perceived as a distraction, could not ignore the effect. Samantha Fields, who had moments ago been quoting ordinances with precision, paused mid-sentence, glancing at Emily and Rex. Thomas Green, her counterpart, furrowed his brow and then shook his head in a subtle smile. The courtroom, once rigid and procedural, was now alive with an energy neither side could control. Emily's curiosity had not only captivated Rex, but had subtly shifted the tone of the entire room, transforming a mundane legal proceeding into a story of innocence, courage, and unexpected empathy. Claire watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and awe. She marveled at Emily's fearlessness, how a child so small could command attention not through words or authority, but through sincerity and gentle persistence. Emily's tiny hands reached out again, patting Rex's head softly. The dog leaned in, his large frame lowering slightly to meet her gesture, his eyes calm and understanding. Emily giggled, delighted by the response, and whispered, "You're my friend." The simplicity of her words, the purity of her intention, created a resonance that went beyond what anyone in the room could articulate. Officer Martinez observed silently, impressed by both Emily and Rex. The dog had been trained to detect threats, assist officers, and maintain composure under pressure. Yet here, he was entirely focused on a child, responding to her innocence and curiosity without hesitation. Martinez felt a quiet pride. This was exactly why Rex had been trained for public interactions, though he could never have predicted such a profound connection would occur during a courtroom session. Emily's courage and genuine affection had unlocked a side of Rex that few had ever seen. The judge, Harold Benson, cleared his throat softly, trying to maintain focus on the proceedings while acknowledging the extraordinary scene before him. He realized that the child and the dog were not merely a distraction. They were a reminder of the human element often lost in legal debates. This courtroom, he thought quietly, was built for rules, facts, and arguments, but it has never before witnessed such authenticity. Emily, unaware of the impact of her presence, continued to lean toward Rex, whispering her small words of encouragement, her dark eyes full of wonder and admiration. The adult's focus had subtly shifted. Lawyers who had previously argued with vigor were now speaking more gently. Witnesses were calmer, and even the spectators seemed to lean forward with a sense of shared curiosity. Emily's small gestures, and quiet whispers had become the emotional center of the courtroom, commanding attention in a way that no argument or piece of evidence could. The child's courage, matched by Rex's calm intelligence, was a silent testament to the power of innocence and genuine connection. Emily's curiosity finally led her to a bold decision. She stood up slightly, holding her mother's hand for balance, and took a small step toward Rex, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Can I pet you?" she asked softly, her voice carrying just enough for Rex to hear. The dog responded by lifting his head, ears flicking attentively, as if understanding the simple request. Claire held her breath, nervous yet proud, while the courtroom collectively leaned in, watching the small, fearless interaction. Rex allowed Emily to place her tiny hands on his head. She laughed softly, marveling at his size, his calmness, and the warmth of his presence. "You're so big," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. The dog pressed his nose gently against her hands, acknowledging her curiosity and acceptance. Adults exchanged glances, some amused, others visibly moved. The judge smiled quietly to himself, recognizing that what Emily and Rex shared in that moment was something rare and extraordinary, an unspoken understanding that transcended age, authority, and circumstance. By midday, Emily's curiosity had transformed the courtroom. What had begun as a routine legal session now felt alive with emotion, warmth, and the unexpected power of innocence. Emily and Rex were no longer merely a child and a dog. They had become symbols of courage, connection, and empathy. The adults in the room, whether they realized it or not, had been gently reminded that human interactions, no matter how small, could hold more significance than legal arguments or procedural correctness. And so, Emily's curiosity had reached its peak. She had approached Rex boldly, whispered her tiny words, and established a connection that resonated throughout the courtroom. What had been a mundane legal proceeding was now transformed into a living testament to innocence, trust, and courage. Little did anyone know that this quiet connection would soon lead to a moment so powerful it would stun the judge, officers, lawyers, and spectators alike, forever changing how they remembered that ordinary day in the small-town courthouse. The courtroom was quieter now than it had been all morning. The minor legal arguments had resumed, yet the energy had subtly shifted. Emily, having spent the past hour observing, whispering, and gently interacting with Rex, now seemed to grow bolder. Something had changed in her small frame. A determination sparked in her dark eyes. Her tiny hands rested gently on Rex's head as she whispered, murmured, and laughed softly. She seemed to be speaking a language no one else could understand, but her intent was clear. She wanted to communicate, not just observe. Claire, Emily's mother, noticed her daughter straightening up, her lips forming words with a focus and clarity, unusual for a child of 3. "Be careful, sweetie," Claire whispered, though her own curiosity made her heart race. Emily ignored her mother's caution for a moment, kneeling closer to Rex and meeting his large, dark eyes. The dog, sensing her intent and understanding her innocence, leaned forward slightly. His ears flicked attentively, his tail wagging just enough to acknowledge her focus. Everyone in the courtroom, adults, officers, and witnesses alike, was oblivious to the moment, building in the small corner of the room. Emily's small voice rang out, soft but determined. "Thank you." The words, simple yet profound, seemed to cut through the tension that had dominated the room for hours. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The adults froze mid-action. The judge's pen halted over a legal brief. A lawyer paused mid-sentence, and a witness in the corner blinked in disbelief. 2 words, barely audible, had suddenly commanded the attention of every person present. "Thank you," Emily repeated softly, glancing at Rex with wide, earnest eyes. It was a child's expression of gratitude, completely unfiltered and genuine, and it carried a weight that no legal argument could match. Rex, trained to respond to human cues, leaned in closer. His nose brushed against Emily's hand gently, a quiet acknowledgement of the sincerity in her voice. Emily giggled softly, delighted by the response, and whispered again, "Thank you, Rex." The simplicity of the gesture, two small words paired with innocence and curiosity, transformed the courtroom. Adults who had spent the morning immersed in arguments, rules, and procedures now felt a strange, almost magical shift in their emotions. The judge, Harold Benson, adjusted his glasses, his eyes misting slightly. It was not the first time Judge Benson had seen children in his courtroom, nor the first time he had witnessed the effects of a therapy or police dog. Yet never before had a combination of the two, a child and a police dog, created such a profound impact. "Remarkable," he whispered to himself, leaning back in his chair. He could feel the weight of Emily's words pressing upon him, soft yet undeniable. Two simple words had managed to pierce the layers of seriousness, tension, and adult rationality that dominated his courtroom. The lawyers, too, were stunned. Samantha Fields, mid-argument, paused, lowering her papers. Thomas Green, previously focused on dissecting evidence, stared in disbelief. Even the court clerk, who had been typing at a steady pace, stopped for a moment, fingers hovering over the keys. Emily's words had become a focal point, shifting the emotional atmosphere entirely. It was as though the entire room had been reminded of something fundamental. Kindness, gratitude, and innocence could not be measured in legal codes or property maps, yet they could command attention more effectively than any argument. Emily, unaware of the effect she had on the courtroom, continued speaking softly to Rex. "Good boy," she murmured, patting his head gently. Rex leaned into her touch, his dark eyes calm and attentive. The simplicity of their interaction, child and dog, honesty and trust, highlighted a truth long forgotten in the procedural monotony of legal proceedings. Sincerity mattered. The judge allowed a small smile to cross his face, and even the lawyers could not hide their amazement. Witnesses who had entered the room nervous and hesitant now seemed more relaxed, their nerves eased by the quiet power of Emily's words. Officer Martinez knelt slightly, observing the exchange with pride and a hint of awe. He had seen Rex interact with countless members of the public, yet nothing compared to this. A 3-year-old had managed to convey gratitude, courage, and innocence so effortlessly that the room's entire tone had shifted. The courtroom, once tense and formal, now felt warmer, softer, and oddly human. Emily's words had reminded everyone present that law, while important, was ultimately about people, connection, and understanding. The judge finally cleared his throat, regaining composure, but unable to hide his amazement. "Well," he said softly, a note of wonder in his voice, "it seems we have learned a lesson in gratitude today from perhaps the youngest and bravest participant in this room." The courtroom chuckled quietly, the sound light and genuine, a stark contrast to the tension that had dominated earlier proceedings. Emily's 2 words had broken through layers of seriousness, reminding everyone that humanity could flourish even in the most structured and formal settings. Emily, sensing that she had the dog's attention, took a deep breath and repeated her 2 words once more. "Thank you, Rex." The dog leaned closer, pressing his nose gently against her hand. She giggled, delighted by the acknowledgement, and whispered additional phrases that only he could understand. But the impact of those first 2 words lingered. The courtroom had collectively recognized the beauty of her simplicity, the courage of her innocence, and the undeniable truth of her sincerity. 2 words had managed to stun everyone present, shifting the focus from legal technicalities to the power of genuine human connection. Claire, Emily's mother, felt a surge of pride. Her daughter had spoken from the heart, unaware of the gravity of her surroundings. Yet she had commanded the attention of adults, officers, and the judge. The child's bravery was remarkable, not in defiance, but in honesty. She had reminded everyone that courage did not always manifest in grand gestures or arguments. Sometimes it arrived in the form of two small words, spoken softly to a dog in a courtroom. The realization left a quiet hum of awe in the room. The courtroom's mood had shifted completely. What had begun as a formal, procedural session of minor disputes had transformed into a display of innocence, bravery, and emotional clarity. Witnesses who had been nervous moments ago now smiled softly. Lawyers paused to absorb the moment, and even the judge leaned back, reflecting on the unspoken lesson. Emily's two words had transcended the boundaries of age, experience, and societal expectations. They had reminded everyone that authenticity, simplicity, and empathy could command attention far more powerfully than any legal argument. Emily finally relaxed, sensing that Rex understood her gratitude. She sat back slightly, patting his head one last time and whispering, "You're my friend." The dog pressed his nose gently against her hand, acknowledging the bond. The courtroom, once focused solely on procedural matters, now held a rare warmth, a shared understanding of something intangible, yet profoundly human. Two words, simple, innocent, and heartfelt, had transformed the entire environment, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. Judge Benson cleared his throat, regaining control of the proceedings, but unable to suppress his smile. "I believe," he said softly, "that we have just witnessed the power of gratitude and courage in its purest form." The room responded with quiet murmurs of agreement. Lawyers, officers, witnesses, and spectators alike were now united by a shared recognition. Emily's two words had stunned the courtroom, shifting the mood, perspective, and understanding of everyone present. It was a moment no one would forget. By the time the court session resumed fully, Emily had become more than just a child in the room. She was a symbol of bravery, sincerity, and the remarkable power of innocence. Her two words, simple yet profound, had reminded everyone that sometimes the smallest voices could carry the greatest weight. The courtroom, once dominated by tension and legal formalities, now held a sense of humanity, warmth, and awe, a testament to the extraordinary impact of a 3-year-old's curiosity and courage. And so, the moment of truth had arrived and passed, yet its impact lingered in the hearts and minds of all who witnessed it. Emily's two words, "Thank you," had stunned the judge, officers, lawyers, and spectators, transforming a routine courthouse morning into a lesson in humanity, empathy, and the undeniable power of innocence. The stage was now set for the aftermath, where everyone would grapple with the profound effect of a child and a dog, connected in the simplest yet most powerful way imaginable. The courtroom was still buzzing quietly in the aftermath of Emily's two words. "Thank you," had been whispered so softly, yet it resonated more profoundly than anyone could have anticipated. Judge Harold Benson sat back in his chair, momentarily lost in thought. Decades on the bench had taught him to expect anything from witnesses, lawyers, and defendants, but he had never encountered a situation like this. A 3-year-old child, in her innocence, had managed to stun a room of adults with nothing more than a few simple words and a quiet, fearless display of gratitude. Judge Benson adjusted his glasses, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and allowed himself a rare pause. He observed Emily, sitting slightly forward with her small hands resting on Rex's head, eyes sparkling with excitement and curiosity. The dog responded gently, nudging her fingers, as if confirming that her words had been received and understood. The judge felt a sudden wave of emotion, something between awe, nostalgia, and quiet admiration. He realized that the child's innocence had cut through layers of authority, tension, and procedural formality that often clouded his courtroom. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Judge Benson's eyes lingered on Emily and Rex, and he reflected on the significance of what had just occurred. Here was a tiny human, fearless in her honesty and sincerity, reaching out to a trained police dog and expressing gratitude in a way adults could neither anticipate nor replicate. The judge's mind wandered briefly to his own childhood, recalling moments of wonder and simplicity that had long been buried under the weight of adult responsibilities. He realized, almost painfully, how rare it was to witness unfiltered authenticity in such a formal environment. The courtroom staff, initially focused on documents, schedules, and procedures, now watched in quiet awe. The clerks at the side of the room exchanged smiles, recognizing the rarity of the moment. Officers whispered softly among themselves, sharing astonished glances. Even the lawyers, Samantha Fields and Thomas Green, had paused, their arguments suspended as they observed the genuine connection between child and dog. Judge Benson cleared his throat, signaling a brief pause, though it was clear to everyone that the pause was less about decorum and more about absorbing what had just happened. "I must say," Judge Benson began, his voice calm but imbued with wonder, "that I have never witnessed such clarity, sincerity, and courage expressed so effortlessly." His eyes met Emily's, though she was too young to fully comprehend the significance of the attention. Still, she beamed, thrilled that her little gestures had been noticed. Rex, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, pressed his nose gently against her hand. The courtroom seemed suspended in a rare and fragile harmony, as if the weight of adult pretense had been replaced by something more profound, the pure connection between innocence and understanding. The judge leaned back, allowing the words to settle over the room. He spoke again, quieter this time, almost as if addressing himself. 2 words, yet they carry more weight than any argument, evidence, or precedent I have seen in all my years on the bench. His gaze swept across the spectators, officers, and lawyers. There was a shared recognition of the impact. Emily had reminded them all of something vital, something often forgotten, the power of sincerity, empathy, and unfiltered human emotion. It was a lesson neither law books nor courtroom procedures could teach. Officer Martinez knelt slightly, observing the judge's reaction while keeping a protective eye on Rex. He whispered softly to a colleague, "She did it. She changed the room." The colleague nodded, his own eyes glinting with awe. The officers realized that this small child, unaware of her power, had subtly altered the dynamic of a room governed by rules, hierarchy, and logic. The realization left them quietly marveling at how innocence could wield influence in a space they had long regarded as controlled and rigid. Emily, noticing the attention, looked up at Judge Benson with a mixture of pride and curiosity. "Rex likes me," she whispered softly, almost as if confirming a secret bond. The judge smiled warmly, recognizing the purity of her perception. He thought about how often adults missed these quiet truths, the significance of genuine connection, gratitude, and courage. Emily had spoken her truth without fear, judgment, or calculation. In doing so, she had revealed a profound reality, that authenticity often commands more respect than authority, and sincerity carries more weight than expertise. Samantha Fields and Thomas Green, the attorneys, regained composure, yet their eyes lingered on the child and the dog. Their professional arguments suddenly seemed secondary to the unfolding demonstration of courage and humanity. Samantha whispered under her breath, "She's incredible," while Thomas shook his head in quiet agreement. Witnesses who had been nervous and defensive now felt a subtle ease, recognizing that the atmosphere had shifted from tension to a rare warmth. The courtroom, dominated by logic and legal process, had become a stage for a moment of pure human significance. Judge Benson tapped his gavel lightly, regaining procedural control, but unable to suppress his admiration. "Let us remember," he said softly, "that in the midst of argument and evidence, we are still human. Sometimes the smallest voice has the greatest impact." His words hung in the room, not as a reprimand or a lesson in decorum, but as an acknowledgement of the extraordinary event unfolding. Emily, oblivious to the weight of her influence, leaned closer to Rex, whispering her words of encouragement once more. The dog's calm response reinforced the connection, and the room collectively held its breath. Claire watched her daughter with a swelling sense of pride and awe. She realized that Emily had achieved something extraordinary without understanding it fully herself. She had bridged a gap between authority and innocence, formality and emotion, fear and courage. Emily had reminded everyone present, judges, lawyers, officers, and spectators alike, that human connection could transcend age, rank, and societal expectations. Her 2 words had become a catalyst, subtly altering perceptions and creating a shared sense of humanity in the most formal and structured of environments. Judge Benson finally allowed himself to reflect on the deeper meaning. He thought about how often the court dealt with anger, deceit, and misunderstanding. Here was a reminder, stark and simple, that honesty and gratitude were forces that could shift perspective and soften the hardest hearts. Emily, through her fearless simplicity, had provided a lesson in empathy that even decades of experience could not replicate. Her courage, entirely devoid of calculation or concern for perception, had left a permanent mark on everyone present. The courtroom remained unusually still, as though everyone collectively recognized the significance of what had occurred. Emily's words, her gentle gestures, and Rex's calm acceptance had created an environment unlike any other. Witnesses now spoke more openly. Officers felt a subtle calm, and even the attorneys found themselves reconsidering the weight of sincerity over argument. Judge Benson realized that Emily's 2 words were more than gratitude. They were a powerful reminder that human connection could transcend circumstance, hierarchy, and expectation. As the proceedings resumed, the atmosphere in the courtroom had irrevocably changed. Emily had achieved something extraordinary. She had demonstrated that courage and sincerity, even from the smallest among us, could command attention and respect in a world often dominated by authority and procedure. Judge Benson presided with a renewed sense of awareness, subtly integrating the lesson he had just witnessed into his role. Emily and Rex had become a symbol of authenticity, bravery, and empathy, quiet yet indelible forces shaping the courtroom in ways words could barely describe. By the end of the session, the impact of Emily's words had fully settled over the room. The judge, officers, lawyers, witnesses, and spectators all carried with them a sense of awe, a subtle reminder that moments of innocence could leave lasting impressions. Emily, oblivious to her own power, continued to pat Rex's head, whispering softly and giggling quietly. The courtroom had witnessed more than a legal proceeding. It had experienced a lesson in humanity, a rare moment where innocence and sincerity reshaped the emotional landscape entirely. Judge Benson finally leaned back, closing his notes briefly and allowing himself a deep breath. He had presided over countless cases, yet he knew this day would remain unforgettable. A 3-year-old child had reminded him and everyone else in the room of the extraordinary power of simplicity, gratitude, and courage. Emily's 2 words had stunned the courtroom, transforming a routine morning into a profound lesson in empathy and connection, one that would be remembered long after the legal arguments faded into memory. By the time Emily and her mother stepped out of the courthouse, the impact of her 2 words, "Thank you," was already spreading. Word of the extraordinary moment traveled quickly through the small town, whispered first among courthouse staff, then shared by officers, witnesses, and lawyers. In a place where minor disputes were usually forgotten the next day, Emily's simple act had become a story people couldn't stop retelling. Her 2 words, spoken softly to a police dog in a quiet courtroom, were suddenly the topic of conversations in cafes, grocery stores, and even at the local park. Claire, holding Emily's hand, marveled at the reaction. People they passed smiled knowingly, some nodding in recognition of the story they had heard. "She did something special today," Claire whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand. Emily, oblivious to the attention, giggled and waved at a passing dog, mimicking the gentle gesture she had shared with Rex. To Emily, it was all simple play, a continuation of her morning's adventure. Yet to the adults who understood, it had become a symbol of innocence, courage, and the quiet power of gratitude. Back at the police station, Officer Martinez couldn't stop telling his colleagues about Emily's bravery. "You wouldn't believe it if you hadn't seen it," he said repeatedly, shaking his head. Rex, usually calm and disciplined, seemed to carry a hint of pride that day, his tail wagging slightly, as if aware of the attention he had received alongside his tiny companion. Martinez posted a brief note about the incident on the station's bulletin board, a reminder that even small gestures could carry remarkable weight. Other officers, inspired by the story, began sharing their own experiences with children and community interactions, reflecting on how innocence and sincerity could leave lasting impressions. The town's local newspaper caught wind of the story by early afternoon. The headline read simply, "3-year-old thanks police dog in court stuns judge and town." The article described Emily's fearless curiosity, her gentle whispers, and the courtroom's collective reaction. Interviews with the judge, officers, and attorneys highlighted how 2 words from a tiny child had transformed a routine morning into a lesson in humanity. Residents began discussing the story on social media, sharing photos of courthouse dogs and childhood innocence, and marveling at how such a small act could ripple across the entire community. Parents across the town spoke about Emily's bravery with their own children, using the story to teach lessons about kindness, empathy, and courage. In classrooms, teachers shared the tale as an example of how even the youngest voices could matter. Children listened wide-eyed, repeating the 2 words aloud to their pets, siblings, or even imaginary friends. The ripple effect of Emily's simple act extended far beyond the courtroom walls. It became a teaching tool, a source of inspiration, and a reminder that kindness and gratitude were powerful, regardless of age. Even Judge Benson found himself reflecting on the story in private. He sat in chambers, replaying the courtroom moments in his mind. He considered how often the legal system focused on rules, procedures, and the hierarchy of authority, forgetting the human connections that grounded every case. Emily's 2 words had reminded him that justice was not only about evidence or verdicts, it was about empathy, understanding, and the human heart. He decided to share the story in a speech at a judicial conference, emphasizing the lessons learned about patience, presence, and the quiet power of innocence. At the courthouse, colleagues began treating Emily's morning as a milestone. Staff who had once viewed minor disputes as routine now saw the human element in every case. Officers who interacted daily with children in the community shared the story with cadets and recruits, using it as a practical lesson in approachability, patience, and understanding. Rex, too, received recognition for his calm and intuitive demeanor, further highlighting the bond between trained service animals and the communities they protect. The ripple effect was evident. Emily's 2 words had not only stunned the courtroom, but had also influenced the culture of those who witnessed the moment firsthand. Social media amplified the story further. Photos of Rex, alongside drawings of Emily by local children, circulated widely. Comments poured in, praising the child's courage and highlighting the emotional power of small gestures. People from outside the town expressed admiration for the quiet bravery of a 3-year-old, amazed that such a simple act of gratitude could evoke so much attention. Discussions about empathy, kindness, and human connection flourished online, with Emily's story serving as a reminder of the universal importance of acknowledging the good in others. Even in ordinary, unexpected ways, Emily's words influenced daily life. People in the town began acknowledging acts of kindness more consciously. Store clerks smiled more readily. Neighbors offered help without hesitation, and children were encouraged to express gratitude openly. The small gesture of 2 words had subtly shifted community behavior, creating an invisible but tangible atmosphere of warmth and connection. What had started as an innocent interaction between a child and a dog had blossomed into a town-wide lesson in empathy and mindfulness. For Claire, the aftermath was both exhilarating and humbling. She watched as her daughter became a source of inspiration, her small act echoing far beyond the courtroom. Emily, unaware of the broader impact, continued to play, laugh, and explore with the same curiosity she had shown all morning. Claire realized that sometimes the greatest lessons came from the smallest voices, and that courage, sincerity, and gratitude had the power to ripple through lives in ways that no adult authority could replicate. Judge Benson, reflecting in his chambers late that evening, knew that Emily's impact would resonate for years. He considered the countless courtrooms he had presided over, the rules and procedures followed meticulously, and the tension-filled arguments he had mediated. And yet, it was the 2 simple words from a 3-year-old that left the most profound impression. The story would not only be remembered for the immediate astonishment it caused, but also as a timeless lesson about the human heart. That gratitude, courage, and innocence could move people in ways no amount of authority could ever achieve. As night fell, the ripple effects continued quietly but persistently. Parents retold the story at home, children reenacted the courtroom scene in play, and officers reflected on the importance of kindness in their interactions. Emily, unaware of the phenomenon she had inspired, continued to live her small life with wonder, joy, and fearless curiosity. And the town, having witnessed the simple yet powerful moment, carried with it a renewed sense of humanity, a reminder that even the smallest acts, when filled with sincerity, could echo far beyond their initial moment. The ripple effects of Emily's words were far-reaching. They reshaped perspectives, influenced behavior, and reminded everyone of a truth often overlooked in the rush of daily life, that courage and kindness, no matter the size of the person expressing them, could have a profound and lasting impact. What had begun as a small courtroom interaction became a story that touched hearts, strengthened community bonds, and reminded a small town and eventually beyond of the quiet, undeniable power of a child's innocence. And so, the story of Emily and Rex did not end when the courthouse doors closed. The 2 words, spoken softly, reverberated through lives, conversations, and communities, leaving an enduring legacy. A 3-year-old had reminded the world that gratitude, courage, and innocence could not only stun a judge in a courtroom, but could also ripple outward, touching hearts far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Weeks had passed since the unforgettable courtroom moment, yet the story of Emily and Rex lingered in the town's consciousness. What had begun as a simple interaction between a 3-year-old child and a police dog had transformed into a tale of inspiration, kindness, and courage that no one would forget. Emily herself remained blissfully unaware of her growing legend. To her, it was simply a continuation of her day full of gentle pats, soft whispers, and the endless curiosity that defined her small but fearless spirit. Claire noticed the subtle changes around her. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers approached her, eager to recount their impressions of the story. Some marveled at the courage of a 3-year-old. Others reflected on the profound simplicity of Emily's 2 words, "Thank you." Teachers at the local preschool had incorporated the story into lessons on gratitude, empathy, and human connection. Children listened with wide-eyed fascination, learning that courage did not always come in grand gestures, but could appear in the smallest, most sincere words. Rex, too, seemed aware that his role had been significant. Officer Martinez watched him closely, noting a quiet pride in the dog's demeanor. He allowed Rex brief walks around the station with Emily whenever she visited, and each time, Emily's energy seemed to radiate outward, lifting the spirits of officers and civilians alike. The bond between child and dog had become emblematic of something larger: the unexpected power of innocence, patience, and trust to touch hearts and inspire change. Judge Benson reflected on the moment more than anyone else, carrying it with him even in chambers, during hearings, and at public events. He found himself recounting the story not to simply amuse colleagues, but to remind them of a fundamental truth: the law serves humanity, and humanity cannot be fully understood without empathy and connection. Emily's courage had demonstrated that even the smallest voices deserved to be heard, and that acts of kindness could resonate far beyond the immediate moment. The courtroom, once a place of rigid formality, became subtly transformed as well. Judge Benson encouraged officers, clerks, and attorneys to remember Emily's lesson. Small gestures of kindness were encouraged. Witnesses were treated with patience, and public interactions were handled with gentle empathy. The ripple effect of 2 words, spoken softly by a fearless child, had reshaped a culture of strict procedure into one infused with warmth and understanding. Emily's legacy, though unintended, was firmly established. Social media continued to amplify the story. Videos, photos, and illustrations of Emily and Rex circulated widely, garnering attention beyond the town. People across the country, and even internationally, were captivated by the tale of a 3-year-old who had managed to stun a judge with gratitude and courage. Online communities debated the significance of the moment, discussed the lessons of empathy, and celebrated the extraordinary power of innocence. Emily's story became a beacon of hope, reminding people that even in a complex world, simple, heartfelt gestures could leave lasting impressions. Community organizations and schools began using Emily's example to foster compassion and empathy among children. Local police departments invited children to interact safely with service animals, emphasizing the importance of respect, patience, and understanding. Teachers crafted activities around gratitude, encouraging children to express sincere appreciation to friends, family, and even animals. Emily's 2 words had grown into a framework for teaching humanity itself, demonstrating that courage and kindness were universally accessible, regardless of age. Claire, observing her daughter, often marveled at how effortless Emily's impact had been. "She doesn't even realize what she did," Claire whispered one evening, watching Emily giggle as she stroked Rex's head. Emily's innocence was the very source of her power. Without fear, calculation, or self-consciousness, she had bridged divides between adults, inspired empathy, and transformed perceptions. Claire understood that her daughter had created a legacy not by intention but by pure, genuine heart, the kind that commands attention without demanding it. Judge Benson, reflecting on the story, eventually decided to honor the moment publicly. He invited Emily and Rex to a small ceremony at the courthouse, celebrating their impact on the community. Officers, attorneys, courthouse staff, and residents attended, all eager to pay tribute to the child whose 2 words had changed perspectives and hearts. Emily, still unaware of her legendary status, approached Rex with her usual fearless enthusiasm. She whispered her tiny phrases, and the dog responded with calm, gentle acknowledgement, as if confirming that the moment mattered. During the ceremony, Judge Benson spoke to the crowd. "In my decades on the bench, I have seen countless arguments, disputes, and testimonies. Today, however, I witnessed something extraordinary, a reminder that humanity, empathy, and kindness are the forces that truly bind us." A 3-year-old child spoke 2 simple words: "Thank you," and in doing so, taught us all a lesson we will never forget. Applause filled the room, heartfelt and genuine, as everyone reflected on this simple yet profound wisdom Emily had shared. The ripple effects extended even further. Neighboring towns shared the story. Local news outlets featured it as an example of hope and community spirit, and law enforcement agencies cited it as a case study in the power of community engagement and humane policing. Emily's 2 words had grown into a symbol proof that courage and gratitude, no matter the size of the person expressing them, could leave indelible marks on society. The legacy of a tiny child and a patient police dog had become a story that transcended the boundaries of the courtroom, inspiring action, reflection, and compassion across a wide audience. Emily herself remained blissfully unbothered by fame or recognition. Her focus remained on Rex, on play, and on the small joys of life. Yet every time she whispered to the dog, touched his fur, or giggled at his responses, she unknowingly reinforced her enduring legacy. The adults around her, parents, officers, judges, teachers, carried her lessons forward, applying them in their own lives. They remembered that even the simplest expressions of gratitude and courage could resonate more profoundly than any words of authority or command. As months turned to years, the story of Emily and Rex became a permanent part of the town's collective memory. The courthouse displayed a small plaque commemorating the moment, recounting the 2 words that had transformed a routine session into an unforgettable lesson in humanity. Children visiting the courthouse learned of Emily's bravery, and officers recalled her example as they interacted with the public. Even those who had been skeptical initially admitted that the simplicity of 2 words, spoken with sincerity and fearlessness, could inspire far more than years of training or experience. The legacy of Emily's 2 words extended beyond the courthouse, the town, and even the state. Stories, articles, and reflections circulated, reminding people of the extraordinary power of innocence and gratitude. Teachers, parents, and community leaders continued to use her example to instill empathy and courage in future generations. Emily had unwittingly become a symbol, proof that the smallest gestures, spoken from the heart, could ripple through lives and communities in ways unimaginable. And so, the story concluded not with fanfare, but with quiet, enduring significance. Emily, fearless and innocent, and Rex, patient and wise, had together shown the world that courage and gratitude do not require age, authority, or status. They merely require sincerity and a heart willing to express it. The 2 words, "thank you," remained etched not only in the memories of those present in the courtroom that day, but in the broader consciousness of an entire town, and beyond. In the end, Emily's impact was simple, profound, and eternal. A tiny child and a loyal police dog had reminded humanity of the power of innocence, the strength of gratitude, and the enduring legacy that even the smallest words can leave on the hearts of many.